Welcome to Motivation Station Podcast.
The hottest motivation show in your suburbs.
Do you feel the daily routine is catching up
Are you a champion of your game?
and you need an extra dose of positivity?
Let's find out together how to live a happier life without stress or negativity. Welcome to Motivation Station with Tatiana D. Welcome back to the Motivation Station. This is Tatiana D, and today we have back Suha Amer. She just recently shared a story about her war-torn country, Lebanon, and I was absolutely impressed with how many people actually did reach out to me with questions they wanted me to pass on to her. So here we are again, prepared to take a much deeper dive into her memory and see the true ugly face of war from the witness who just saw it all firsthand, and not just saw it, but lived through it. Physical scars, as we know, and physical trauma eventually goes away. However, emotional scars stay with us forever. So let's welcome Suha. Good to have you back.
Thank you for having me, Tatiana. Thank you.
Sure. So for those who are listening to this episode before they had a chance to hear the first one, I would like to ask Suha briefly recap or summarize the main points from her story in the first part of our interview, and then we're going to go to the questions.
Sure. The demographic tensions over the National Pact, which divided the basic three elements of governing in Lebanon back in the 70s, early 70s, between the Christian Maronites, the Muslim Sunnis, and the Shiite Muslims, led to the Lebanese full-scale war, civil war, between the 1975 and 1990. Now, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict played a very essential role of the civil war in Lebanon. When the Sykes-Picot Agreement led to the formation of Israel in 1948, this in itself led to the major expulsion of the Palestinians from Palestine to neighboring countries. And unfortunately, one of those neighboring countries was Lebanon. So the Palestinian Liberation Organization, aka PLO, recruited militants in Lebanon from the Palestinians who were already there as refugees from 1948. Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1978 pushed the PLO and Fatah leaderships. These leaderships were the military wing of the Palestinian, what they call was the resistance of the Israeli, taking over Palestine. So the PLO and Fatah leaderships were pushed deeper into the very core of the Lebanese entity, which was the capital, Beirut. At the same time back then, meanwhile, the Lebanese government was becoming weaker and weaker every day. And the unarmed citizenry could not expel the armed foreigners. All this was kind of like piling up to lead to the major event in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, but this time did not stop in southern Lebanon. It went deeper, and for the first time they went to Beirut. Beirut back then was divided into two parts. West Beirut, which was mainly resided by the Muslims, and the East Beirut, which was, the majority of the residents were Christians. The Christian militias were funded and armed by Israel, which in itself, Israel was backed by the USA. On the other side, the Muslim militias were funded and armed by Russia, Syria, and other Arab countries. Now, here is where in my opinion, I find that the civil war kind of took another shape. And it left that shape, it shed that shape that is religious or civil war. It became another kind of war, more vicious.
I see.
Yes, it became, it lost its framework of civil war, and it became the war of others, but on Lebanese soil. We have now here Israel backed by the US versus Palestinians backed by Russia and Syria. This is it. It was as clear as that, not back then, but now when I did my research and I delved into more details, ultimately this was the problem. The biggest problem was Israel backed by the US, Palestinians backed by Russia and Syria. Everyone wanted to settle scores there. When negotiations, I'm going to give you a very simple example. When they used to meet for negotiations, okay, ceasefire or to solve the problem, the negotiations used to begin, let's say, in Geneva or in the United Nations or even in Camp David, okay? One can be very sure that the fighting on the ground between the factions, the Lebanese factions, would escalate before these meetings were even convened. So, yeah, they were kind of like pulling strings on the ground through fighting so that they can score in their negotiations and get the most of the negotiations, each part.
Practically, we see that, from what I understand, that Lebanese soil became sort of like a playground for bigger players.
100%.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Please go on.
That was actually, what almost happened. But in 1982 was what really tipped the power players on the ground. Israel besieged Beirut, okay, because as I mentioned before, they pushed the PLO and the Fatah movement from the southern boundaries, the southern borders actually between Israel and Lebanon. They pushed them and they didn't have any more place, so they went to Beirut, okay? They were stuck there. Now, Israel besieged Beirut on June 13, 1982. The PLO and part of the Syrian forces were isolated in the western side of Beirut, along with, unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of Lebanese unarmed civilians who had nowhere else to flee for safety. And one of those Lebanese people, civilians, were my family and myself and my sister and lots of my relatives and friends.
That is unimaginable. That is
to say the least. Yeah, to say the least.
It's for those who never saw the ugliness of the war.
Yes. Sometimes I know that, picture can tell thousands of words, but sometimes also you need to talk when there's no picture to show, right?
Because when we are watching, sorry to interject, but what I'm trying to say, yeah, we've seen a lot of Hollywood movies about war, and they are done with super cool effects, and they show the horror and tears, and actors are blown to pieces, died, cry, all in blood, scars and tears. But we all know that at the end of the movie, they're all okay and alive, and it's just stunning acting job and makeup and everything. But here we are talking to you who was born there under practically bombardment and lived through it. So that's why it's so important, and I'm so grateful that you are sharing with us your story. So
you summed it up very accurately, actually. Yes, Hollywood is totally different than reality.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. I want to also highlight some things that it's going to be kind of new information for the listeners. I did not have probably the time for at the first part of this interview to share. So as I was saying, like Israel used, this is where it became very ugly. The ugly side of war is not only the political players, okay? It's also the means, what the weapons, the weaponry, what kind of heavy weaponry were being used exactly to make people, to make suffering more profound. Okay, so as I went through the list, and I encourage lots of people here, the listeners, to go do their work as well and research and find what kind of weaponry was used during that particular invasion in 1982. One of the deadliest, I remember, bombings were the cluster bomb. This was like, okay, Israel used to let's say send it from a warplane. The bomb will suck literally the air out of the building. Like if they are hitting a building, they will suck the air, like they vacuum the air. Okay.
Oh my God.
And then it will blow the whole building within seconds. It will be on the ground, and it will leave, not only that, it will leave as if like small particles that are not blown up within the explosion itself, so that when other civilians, people are coming back to where their homes were to check if they have still some of their stuff to take, those small particles will blow up and cause fatalities and more casualties.
Delayed.
Yes, exactly. That is, I think I'm actually sure that it is forbidden within the United Nations laws and regulations. These kind of weapons were forbidden to be used because they were so inhumane. But for some reason, Israel did not, abide by those rules. So back to the 1982, I think Israel found a combination of military pressure combined with psychological warfare was the best way to approach getting rid of the PLO and Fatah from Beirut back then. Because for 7 to 8 weeks, when the Israeli forces attacked Beirut by sea, air, and land, they cut off in the process all sources of food chains, water supplies. They disconnected electricity and secured the airport and southern suburbs.
How did you leave?
That's where I want to share with you. We couldn't leave at the beginning because by the end of the first week of July, it was recorded that almost 500 residential buildings had been completely destroyed. Completely. wiped out in 1 week. When negotiations reached a deadlock between the key players, unfortunately, by the end of July, the IDF intensified its attacks, and the Israeli Secret Service. And here comes the second part of the dirty game. The Mossad, using their phalangist contacts, sent, unfortunately, Arab agents into Beirut with car bombs to terrorize the Palestinians into submission. But in the process, unfortunately, they managed to mainly kill and maim hundreds of Lebanese innocent civilians. One of those cars, actually two of those cars, I had personal encounter with. They targeted some schools, unfortunately, some students, teachers, and almost some parents were deceased by that.
Wow. Yeah. I understand that there is no greater suffering imaginable than those of civilians in a war zone. And we kind of more are aware of the fate of the refugees who left the war zone. It doesn't matter which country, any country where we're talking about any kind of military situation and refugees are fleeing, but they are the lucky ones because they had one way or another way to escape. They made it out alive. They are already out of the war zone. But I want to dig deeper and see how, it's those who couldn't leave because maybe they're older or they're ill, or the younger ones who are supposed to take care of those older ones who couldn't leave. How the life was in not just Beirut, in the Lebanon, but I know that you are from Beirut, and we were talking about besieging the Beirut earlier. So I kind of want to see, and I want our listeners to hear what it was day to day. You were born practically under the bombardment, because I know that almost 3 decades of your life were spent there. So
yeah.
Despite the horror of surviving in a long-term war zone, people still would fall in love, get married, have children. What happens to the mentality of those people who live there?
They are still suffering up till now. As you said, that physical scars come and go, but the emotional scars,
They stay.
Of course, they take shape. You learn how to live with your dark side. As I mentioned before, you know what? I had no other option but to go forward, because the other options were very scary. So all I can share with you is that from my early teen years up until actually 10 years ago, very recent, I was still kind of living in a survival mode. You may ask, what is that?
Yeah.
I was not aware I was in a survival mode until 10 years ago. The little girl found refuge in those dark days and nights in eating chocolate and listening to music. Pink Floyd, Supertramp, you name it, But 10 years ago, something happened to me personally, and it triggered I think my subconscious, and
Mhm.
I was not aware that that this was happening. I thought it was what I was seeing in my mind when I was sleeping, and I wake up in tears and
Not
super afraid. I thought they were not random nightmares, you know? Maybe I watched this violent movie. Maybe I watched something that triggered it, but I didn't fully comprehend what was going on. So I think this is recurring on a very upscale level. This cannot be the same nightmare over and over again. This is ridiculous. So I called my father and my sister, and I asked them questions, very particular questions. It was related actually to some even places back in Lebanon. And they went silent. My dad couldn't talk to me. So he gave the phone to my sister, who was very, very upset. And she said these words, I still remember. She said, "Why do you want to open the Pandora box?" I said, "What do you mean? I'm not trying to do anything. I'm asking you a question. What happened? What's going on? I don't understand why I'm having these nightmares." She said they were not nightmares. They were our lives for
memories.
for almost 3 decades.
That is very tough.
Very, to say the least. So I'm gonna relate to you a couple of incidents that are not as horrific as the other ones that I'm trying to hold back until, because I'm writing a book, and I don't want to remember these memories right now. I don't want to be in that place right now, you know? Yeah, because I learned how to deal with this. So I know myself, I know my limits, I know when to go deep in my thoughts and when not to, because it hurts, it's painful, not only on the emotional side, but also on the physical side.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I cannot afford to do that right now, you know?
Okay, I hear it. But
So,
if you share anything, I would appreciate it. And I'm sorry if it's going to be painful.
okay, well, I'm gonna just give you a highlight of the most actually traumatic experience that I went through. Because, you know, I spoke about these car bombs, right? And it said that my school where I used to go high school in Beirut, it had two exits, like one up a hill, small hill, and the other one goes down and you go to the other way, to the other side of Beirut. And I was going with my sister to the other side. And then a car bomb happened. And then another car bomb happened at the other side. So within 10 minutes or 15 minutes span, you have one car bomb was planted in a car next to one school exit. And then when we were scattering and going back to the other exit, another car bomb went off. I'm sorry, but I cannot delve into the details here because this incident is too traumatic for me to handle at the moment. But I can remember other stuff like when Beirut was besieged, I was there with my family. So when this car incident happened, my parents said, you know what, we're done. We need to go away from here. We need to get the kids out of here in any means possible. So a couple, no, actually more than like, it's kind of like probably 3-4 families, our neighbors, the adults started planning, where to go, obviously, and how to do it. So all I remember about this is that I can recall that we were walking long distances, long time at night. I don't know where and when, but I lately found out that we were walking at night because we wanted to evade the snipers. We wanted to evade being shot by snipers. Okay, so we moved at night, and we slept in the mornings, in buildings that are already demolished, and or like in certain small parks here and there, until we reached a safe place next to the mountains where my hometown was, in Ba'lin. When we reached the outskirts of the mountain, my dad found the people there who had a phone, because we didn't have cell phones, obviously, at those times. And he called his cousin from Ba'lin, and they went with cars and trucks to pick us up. And they took us to Ba'lin, to our home. I really cannot verify how many days and nights we spent, but not less than 3 or 4 in total until we got there. We spent the rest of the period of this Beirut Siege in the mountains. But I have to admit that every day, every night, we were very aware of what was going on in Beirut, because we could hear everything. We could hear the war planes when they were making raids over Beirut. We were hearing the bombardments, the heavy artillery that was used there. It was very clear, especially during the night.
Wow. That is absolutely unimaginable. So, yeah, we know there was no means of communication like radio, TV, and it's just a horror of hearing the bombardments, because apparently it's so loud that you can see from a different city and different location. How far was your hometown from Beirut, approximately?
Around like half an hour by car, if there's no traffic. Okay. Lebanon is too small. It's like 10,352 square kilometers.
Okay, I hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that big. It's like the size of LA multiplied maybe by 10, or I don't know, to be particular, to be specific.
It's horrible, because snipers you were talking. It's the first time I was hearing from you talking about snipers and going through the night toward snipers. And how old you were at the time?
I believe I was around 13, 14. Yeah. I think, yeah, because the car incident happened when I just turned probably 14.
I hear you.
Yeah, I was in high school.
How anyone can be happy? Was there any, it may even sound ridiculous, we're talking about besiege, but
no, it's not ridiculous at all. I told you that for me, the refuge, I found peace in eating chocolate and listening to music nonstop. I remember my dad would buy me these specific kind of chocolate, Choco Prince. It was, I don't know if you still have it here. I don't know if you have it here, but it was kind of like a biscuit filled with a chocolate filling and then covered with chocolate. And it had like, each box would have like 30 of those. And every time the bombarding starts, I open one and I start eating very quickly. And I did not realize what I was doing until at a later age, I related to this as if whenever I'm afraid of the bombarding and whenever I'm tense and I'm getting scared, and I go to this small corner in our house and I would sit there with with a small radio, and I would hear the FM waves, and I make it a very high sound so that I won't hear the bombardments. And then I would open the box of chocolate and eat one after the other, until, because I knew I would be looking at the door of the bedroom, anticipating that my dad and my mom would come and pick us up and get us to shelter, because then the bombardments are getting too close for comfort to stay in our apartment on the 4th floor. This was literally on a daily basis.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So shelters you had in the basement of the house?
And the building, every building, yeah.
What was in that shelter? Was there any water, toilet to use, restroom, or electricity or food? What was inside?
No electricity. Electricity was non-existent for a long period of time. There is no electricity. Water, we used to, of course, the adults would go like, there was certain areas, because of the water shutoffs, they would go to certain areas where they have pumps to pump the water out, and fill the gallons for drinking water and gallons for using, to wash or whatever. So there are specific kind of gallons to fill. And then for food, they would go when there was ceasefire, random ceasefires. They would go, and the people who have who own shops, they would open when these ceasefire, because they anticipate people coming in to buy stuff. And then in the shelter itself, we have small kind of like either sofas or mattresses for us to sleep on. The youngers, the people, the kids were given these things, but the adults will take rounds to stay up so that they will make sure that no one will come into the building, from the fighting, fractions, and may take us hostages or even kill us.
Oh my God. How many people would be in the shelter?
We have 5 to 6 stories building, our building. We were on the 4th floor. I think each story has 2 families. So maybe in total, 12 families would go down there. Those who are left there, some people left. When there's ceasefire, they would leave. If they have other places to go, like in northern Lebanon, in southern Lebanon. Yeah.
Now, you guys were buying food.
Mm-hmm.
There is no gas, no electricity, no refrigeration. So what kind of food was there? How would you cook it? Where would you store it?
We would get stuff that doesn't need cooking, like mainly bread. We go to these ovens. They have, pita breads ready to sell. Even they were old, and nasty, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do. I remember one time that actually this is imprinted on my brain forever, I guess. This old guy, this elderly man, I don't know if he lost his memory or there's something that was weird with him. So all of a sudden we heard screaming. There was a ceasefire. So I remember everybody went out to see what's happening. And all of a sudden we see this elderly man at the end of our street. They were, you have here when the trash, trash cans, in the front of the house, like every Monday they come and pick them up here in the US. Okay, they have special times. We have these big containers. Everybody puts their trash there so that, the trash truck can come and pick it up. Okay. So that guy was at one of those trash cans, and he was picking up things to eat.
Oh my God.
Because I think he doesn't know where he was. I think he was not aware of his surroundings. And then I see like 5 Syrian members of the Syrian army with their guns, with their rifles. And they come to him and start screaming at him. And all of a sudden he's just, pulling his hands over his head and crying. And then they held the butt of one of the rifles and struck him on the head, and he fell to the ground. And I remember there were my dad and lots of other, adult guys who hurried and started screaming at them and tried to pick him up. And the soldiers held their rifles at gunpoint and threatened my dad and the other adults to go back or they will shoot them right there and then. And mind you, they will, because they did that to others. We never saw that old man again. We don't know what happened to him.
Wow.
Yeah. There was other incident when the Israeli besiege of Beirut ended, and it ended, all these bombardment and everything of Beirut. It didn't actually resolve the problem, because ultimately, at the end of the day, they had to reach an agreement, a peaceful agreement. Okay. And I remember there was this US envoy to Lebanon. I think his name back then was Philippe Habib. And he met with the leaders of those who were fighting on the ground, and also with Israelis representatives back then, and Palestinian PLO representatives, and Syrian representatives as well, and Russian, I think. So they met and came to an agreement. And in August 21st, around 350 French paratroopers arrived in Beirut, and followed by, I think, close to 800 Marines and Italian battalions, also additional peacekeepers from I think, some Arab countries as well. It totaled almost to 2,000 peacekeepers from around the world. And their main goal was to supervise the removal of the PLO leadership and the Fatah leadership from Lebanon by ship and overland. And some of them were taken to Tunisia, Yemen, Jordan, and Syria. Now this happened at the end of 6 to 5 weeks of siege of siege in Beirut, you might ask, what did I find what do I recall when we go back to our houses in Beirut?
Absolutely. Please.
Fortunately, our building was standing up. But other than that, it's unrecognizable at that point. What I saw was, what I recall mostly, it's funnily enough or not, is when we were at the outskirts of Beirut getting in, the very first thing that strikes you was the odor.
Wow.
The foul odor that was filling the place. It's like death odor. And when we got to our neighborhood, I remember there was a big building behind our building. It hosted more than 30 families for sure, because it was a new building that was built. So one time I was, when there was ceasefire, I went with my sister and our peers to kind of like play in the neighborhood. And we went around to that building and we were peeking because it had a very big, I think, garage underneath. The building in itself was destructed, but you can peek and see. And what we saw was horrible. I remember seeing bodies floating.
What you mean floating?
I think the water
In the
in the garage. The people were left their, I think, apartments when the air raids were happening. So they went into their garage to seek refuge there. And I think because of the bombarding, the water, pumps, I don't know, the pipes blew up or something. And somehow the garage probably was locked. They couldn't find their way out. They sank there.
Oh my God.
So they floated. I remember seeing big bodies, small bodies, kids, I guess. So they stayed there. After, at a later age, when I started asking these questions and I wanted to find answers, I was told that Israel thought that Yasser Arafat was hiding there. So they bombarded with this special kind of, bomb that I told you about. It vacuums and then it hits. Obviously, he was not there because he survived to leave out, right?
Yeah, we know that.
Yeah.
Wow, that is devastating to live through all that.
Yeah, it was.
Because it's practically living a daily terror and fear and not knowing whether or not you're gonna, and I'm not even talking about having a home, just whether or not you're gonna have to see your loved one again. Yeah, that's the most painful experience I imagine one can have. And here in America, we are luckily spared to be like this, and we should, I hope, not taking stuff like that.
Yeah, no one goes into details when covering these kind of stories because they are corporate medias. They don't care about
Yeah, I understand.
what really happens to people.
That's why it's
I
so
mean,
interesting to speak with a living witness of that. You.
and thank you for that, for your interest, really. I greatly appreciate that. But, I just want to tell people who are listening, it's easy. It's very easy for people to start a war, but you might know how wars happen, but no one will ever know how it ends and what it leaves behind.
At what cost?
The destruction of the aftermath of any war around the world is what should matter to us as humans on this world. We lose our humanity when we turn the blind eye, when we don't hold those key players accountable. Because if we don't hold them accountable, who will? They are going to repeat it over and over again. And this is what's going on around us in the world. We are not alone.
You're not.
It's coming here. It's coming here.
I hope not.
I certainly hope not, but that's another, I think, issue we can talk about later.
Maybe. Definitely. Yeah. What I want to add, I was spared. I came in the United States in 1991. However, my mother, back then, she stayed for a year or two behind. I'm from the Republic of Georgia, which used to be part of Soviet Union, and I came in United States right before the Soviet Union fell apart. So
I know.
Yes. So I just know, I just want to mention one experience which stuck as a horror in my mind from what my mother told me back in the day. There was periodically, either I'm from the town Tbilisi, which is capital of the Republic of Georgia. So there was either no electricity or no gas. I know that people were chopping down the furniture to feed the fireplaces, makeshift fireplaces to cook when they were able to. And what struck me the most, my mother, she was an inventor and she was very resourceful. So there were days, one after another, without any gas. And from time to time she would there was candlelight. At those moments when there would be scarce amount of electricity, and she was all alone at the time because I was already here, she needed to eat. So she came up with an idea, which is brilliant to accentuate her survival skills. However, it's horrible. She would plug in the closing iron to iron the clothes, right? She would flip it up with that flat side, which is supposed to be hot and go to iron the clothes. She would flip it up. She would put the tiny skillet on it and make her eggs, her omelet on the top of it. That every time I remember it, it horrifies me.
Yeah.
But it's nothing, in a big picture, it's nothing to compare to what you went through. And it was at the time in Tbilisi when there was a war, it was also civil war between two different, I'm not talking in details, just gonna mention to those who is not familiar. There were two parts of civilian and the government who were overthrowing each other and stuff like that. So that was the time when there was heavy artillery in the middle of my town, in the middle of the central district of the town, when they were using tanks and heavy artillery to shoot the buildings down. And I remember the place close to the place where my grandfather used to live was all on fire. That's horrible. But again, that's nothing in comparison, almost nothing in comparison to what you went through. So I wish I would say, I hope it's never going to happen ever again. That's
anywhere in the world, I hope so, but I'm not that optimistic. I'm trying to be optimistic, but
I don't even know what to say, but That is something horrible, and I hope that those
spreading awareness, what you are doing right
spreading
now,
awareness,
Tatiana, is very, yeah, it's very crucial what you are doing. I really hope that other Tatianas would come up, around the world and really just say the truth. Just you guys shed some light on the truth, because most of the time, a truth is being played with, it's being manipulated for gain, okay, for personal interest. Sharing these stories might help in being preventive agents for later future, God forbid, incidents.
It should help understand for people to understand the ugliness. My main point here is the ugly face of the war. And also, I always put it in the footnotes, and I want to accentuate and verbalize it here, that whatever opinions we have shared here, it's whatever you shared here, it's
of course
your opinion, and whatever I am sharing here, it's just my statements and opinions, and we are not advocating, because it's very
sensitive issue. I understand that. This is what
what I'm trying to say. We are not advocating either pro or against neither of those sides or players. I know that you're a very big peace advocate in Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is very honorable and right, an admirable thing to do. And I have friends on both sides. I know that you're Lebanese, I am a Jew, I'm a Jewish woman, so I don't want neither of the sides to see any attempt to ignite anything or pull sides. No, it's just a way to actually show to the world that we are from those areas where the conflict is hot, unfortunately, till nowadays, but we're good.
I also have friends from both sides of the spectrum.
Yes.
And very close friends. And that's why as you mentioned, I am a peace advocate, because it comes from a conviction, a deep-rooted conviction in me, because which was enhanced because of that particular experience that I was raised and was born and raised in that particular area of the world. So what I am doing these days is mainly, my purpose is to spread awareness and try to tell people that you can be also a very major player in spreading awareness of it's not a simple ride to start a war or to start any kind of violence. It's not. You have to think of the consequences that is, related to your actions, to your words. Okay, that's mainly my goal, and that's another thing to talk about in another, because I know that you are
definitely
specific with the time.
Yes, we're pressed at the time right now, and what was very interesting to me, how people were reacting even after the first episode we did a few days ago with you, because I've got quite a few questions coming from several different, I would say 6 or 7 people sent me questions to ask you. Well, some of them you address here about how the life was in the shelter and all these related issues, but there are a lot of other questions about your views, how you're looking at the political situation and stuff like that. We're going to be talking about it next time. And as much as I normally do not participate in political talks, this experience, particular with you, is very interesting, humbling, learning, and just sharing all those, sharing peace and love.
Exactly. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I hope the listeners, please don't take everything you hear and watch for granted. Go ahead, please, go Google everything that we said here, and just make sure to find the truth, and form your own opinion about things.
Exactly.
We are not here to shape your opinion. It's just to inform you of what happened.
That's exactly. That's the only sole purpose we had today, just to give them information. So thank you very much, Suha. I hope you're going to have a wonderful weekend, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
And that's it. It's time to wrap up another episode. You can find any of your favorite episodes anywhere where you're listening to your podcasts: Google, iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Could you possibly do me a favor and leave a review there to help other amazing people like yourself to find my podcast faster? If you got a question, suggestion, or just want to say hello, please find me on Instagram at _Tatiana Davidov. Until next episode, stay safe, motivated, peaceful, happy. Bye-bye.